In this lesson, we'll use Grease Pencil to add wires to our render. Let's begin. The time has come to draw some wires in our scene. We'll learn some tips along the way to make this an easier task as well. So let's jump right in. Before we start drawing anything, let's get our file cleaned up and ready to draw. First, we can delete the test G Pencil object that we added last lesson to test Grease Pencil. We can find that over here in this Grease Pencil collection. We're just going to select G Pencil and then delete it with the delete key. Next, we're going to hide all the objects on the left wall to make our view of the right wall a little less obstructed. This can be done easily over here in the outliner list, just by clicking on this little checkbox next to the collection left side. So we'll click this, and then we're also going to hide Wires 3D as well. Lastly, we're going to go into a side orthographic view so we can get a perfectly straight on view of the right wall. The easiest way to do this is to just simply go up here to this colorful little gizmo up here, and you just want to rotate your view so that you can see this bubble here. So you want to hover over the one here that says -X, and then when we click on that, it'll jump us into this view. And then you can just use your mouse wheel here to pan around and get it centered. The benefit of this new flat view is that it'll give us a much easier canvas to draw on and make it feel more similar to drawing on a piece of paper. Now that we have everything set up, we're ready to add our new Grease Pencil object and get drawing. Make sure that this Grease Pencil collection is still marked as the active by clicking on this little white folder. Then we can hit Shift and A while hovering over this right viewport, go down here to Grease Pencil, and then choose blank. Before we do any drawing, let's go over here and rename this G Pencil object. We can rename it just by double clicking on the name, and then we'll click over here on the right side, and we're just going to add _wires to the end of it. That way we know exactly what this is. This will help us differentiate it from the other Grease Pencil objects in the scene, and it's just good practice to name objects to keep the file tidy. With the Grease Pencil object still selected, we can go over here to the drop down and then choose Draw Mode. Your Grease Pencil object will likely remember the settings that we used in the last lesson, but let's go through them quickly just to make sure that everybody is ready to draw and using the same settings. So first, make sure that you're on the ink pen rough brush found down here just by clicking on it. We'll want to be set to 3D cursor mode found up here in this drop down. We're going to switch from front to side instead. And then over here on this toolbar, we're going to pan over using our middle mouse click. We're just going to click in the mouse wheel, go to advanced, and then make sure that your radius unit is set to scene. Lastly, we can go over here to the radius. We're going to change the radius to 0.035 and then hit enter. Now we're ready to set our 3D cursor to the side of one of these columns. It technically doesn't really matter which column we choose, as they're all the exact same depth. But in our case, let's zoom in over here to this right column directly right of this ladder. So you should be able to see the ladder here. And we're going to put the 3D cursor here on this column. This will be a good reminder for us when we're drawing that this is the first column that isn't actually in the camera view. So this is just outside the camera view, and then this is the first column that we see. So let's hold Shift, and then we're going to right click on this front face of the column. Try to place it towards the center of it. So anywhere here is fine. You'll know that the 3D cursor is moved because you should see this symbol here now. And then lastly, in another step to keep our file tidy, we're going to rename the layer that these wires will be drawn on. To do this, we're going to go down here to the bottom right. We're going to click on this little tab here, one with the, I guess you could say it's a little corkscrew or a spring icon. And then over here where it says layer, we're going to double click on the word layer to rename it. We're going to call this column wires and then hit enter. As we add more wires, it will be useful to have each type of wire on a separate layer. So keeping them clearly named will be important. We'll remember from our testing in the last lesson that it was a little difficult to draw nice smooth lines for our wires. This is because by default, our brush strokes have very little smoothing applied to them, so any small movements of our hands while drawing the lines are captured and the result is a somewhat wavy line. Luckily for us, Blender has a handy tool to fix this exact issue and make drawing with a mouse much easier. Let's go up to the top where it says stroke, and then we're going to click on this drop down menu. And then down here at the very bottom, we'll see stabilize stroke. So we're going to turn this on by clicking this little box next to it. Now if we just draw a test line using our mouse, we'll notice that the actual pen stroke is slightly delayed behind where the cursor is moving. So let's see an example of that now. So I'm just going to zoom in here, and then we're just going to draw a line from here over here, and we'll have it droop slightly. So we're just going to drag down here, and we can see here that this line is actually following behind where the cursor is at. We'll also notice how much smoother this line is. It's a lot easier to get a nice gradual curve on this, rather than having the mouse jitter as we move the mouse back and forth. You can see here that as I jitter, it's barely affecting the line. It is making it a little bit more wiggly, but it's generally a lot smoother. And you'll also notice the faster you make this stroke, the smoother it is. The stroke stabilization that we turned on has a similar effect to us towing the stroke behind us on a long rope. While it will make detailed drawings a bit more difficult because there is a delay in the movements of our mouse, it does assist greatly in keeping your lines nice and smooth for these wires. While we're drawing, if you make any strokes that you don't like, you can simply hit Ctrl and Z at the same time to undo the last thing you drew. If you hit the button again, Ctrl and Z, it'll undo the second thing you did. It'll just keep going back through the steps. This is a really useful keybind to remember if you just draw a line and then realize, oh, maybe I drew it down too far or I drew it too high. You can just hit Ctrl Z a few times and then go back to where you were. Another option that you have is if you draw a line and then you realize you want to erase just a certain part of it, but not the entire line, we can use the erase tool. So we can switch to the erase tool over here on the left. It's just below the brush. And then I would suggest that you switch it to the point mode instead of dissolve. We'll notice that if I go down here and I erase it with the dissolve mode on, it makes a really soft edge on these lines. However, if I switch it to point instead, it makes a nice hard edge on these lines. I personally don't use the erase tool all that often. Usually when I'm drawing and if I make a stroke that I don't like, I'll just hit Ctrl Z a few times to undo the action and just try the stroke again. But feel free to use whatever method you prefer, although in most cases I'm just going to be using Ctrl Z and then redrawing the line. Now I can switch back here to my brush tool. So our first step here is going to be creating a few hanging wires between each of the columns moving left. So let's zoom out here. We're going to be drawing lines going from this column to this column and then so on and so forth all the way down the line until we reach the end. We're just going to focus on drawing a single wire between each of these. I'd also suggest that you vary the height of where the wires meet the column to help give them a little bit more of a chaotic and natural feeling. So rather than having every one of your wires start at the very top and then end at the very top on the other side, maybe have one start at the top and then meet somewhere down here, and then the next one can go higher and then the next one can go lower, just to give it a bit more variation. I'll be speeding up the video slightly as I draw my lines throughout the rest of this lesson, just so it doesn't take too long, as I don't want you to have to watch me draw in real time. Please take your time while you're drawing though, so feel free just to pause the video, see what I drew, and then if you want to try to match it, go ahead, but don't let me rush you through your drawing. Simply pause the video and then catch up to where I'm at. I'll see you in just a moment when I'm done drawing my first lines. Okay, so I have my lines drawn across each of these columns, and it's just a single wire going between them. I also varied the heights, just so it's a little bit more chaotic. You might have noticed as you were drawing, or if you were watching me draw, that some of these lines don't really meet up. And that's a really easy fix. So we'll just zoom into any of these intersections that don't quite meet, and we'll just click and drag here to draw a line between them. You really don't have to worry about these lines being perfect. We can see here this line's a little bit more wavy, and it also doesn't line up perfectly. That really just adds to the charm. This is supposed to be a little bit more of a scratchy, sort of sketchy process. So don't worry about having perfectly smooth intersections between these. You really just want to make sure that they're connected. You can zoom out a little bit and just kind of fill in this gap here. And then just go through the tops of each of these intersections and just make sure that they meet. Okay, so I have all of my intersections connected. And now our next step is going to be drawing a second layer of wires. This is just going to make these wires a little bit more dense. And in general, you're going to want these wires to meet up roughly where the other ones meet. So you're going to be drawing a line similar to this here. So I'll draw you this first one. So you're going to start up here, and then have this one droop down, and then meet up here. They can go through each other here at the top and intersect. You just want to draw a second layer of wires drooping below the first. This is another situation where you might want to vary how much they're drooping. So maybe one stays a little bit closer and then the next one droops down much further. So I'm going to go through here and then draw a second line below each one of my current first ones. Again, don't worry about these lines being perfect. Just try your best. I promise you it's going to look totally fine in the final render. Just do your best and have fun. So I have all of the second wires placed. And again, I'm going to go through here and just connect these intersections. So we'll just go through each one and just draw these lines here. If you want, you can just fill in this gap here so it looks like it's a bundle of wires. You can be really kind of loose with these intersections. You'll see even in some areas, I didn't even bother connecting them to the same point. And that, again, is totally fine. So just draw a line here and just make it kind of look like they all meet up somewhere here in some sort of nondescript bundle. So go ahead and go through each of your intersections and just make sure that they connect. Alright, we have all of our main wires drawn for the columns, so now it's time to add some smaller detail wires that hang from these thicker wires. These smaller wires will help add some visual texture to the main wires and imply age and decay to our world. we're going to make the line a little bit thinner than the first one to help differentiate them from each other. So we'll go over here to radius. We're going to change this from 0.035 down to 0.02 instead, so slightly smaller. Now let's go over here to the far left side of these wires. We'll zoom in here. We're going to start with this one as our first example. This is the furthest set of wires from the camera, and it'll let us get a little bit more comfortable with the process before drawing wires that are more prominent within the camera view. So you can do a little practice down here when the wires are really tiny on the camera and will generally not be seen all that much. And then as you get comfortable, you can move further and further right until you're drawing the wires here that are a little bit more visible in the camera. So for the process of adding details to these wires, we're going to be drawing squiggly lines along the length of the wire with small drooping areas and broken segments. As an example of what I mean, I'm just going to zoom in here, and then we can start anywhere near the end of this line. So I'm just going to start anywhere I want down here, and I'll just start drawing a line, having it droop down slowly, then I'll wrap it up over the top, and then again down the bottom. Maybe we add a little bit of a longer droop here. We can just keep doing this along the length of the line. And we can see just by drawing a line directly on top of the other one and having it snake back and forth over top of it, it really looks like there's another smaller wire wrapped around this one, as if somebody just kind of twirled it around this one to give it some support as they ran it down the line. This is a super simple way to add more detail to these wires and make them look a little bit more natural and realistic. You also don't need to do these lines in just a single stroke like I did there. If you run out of room while you're drawing, simply wait until the line crosses over like I did here, then move your camera down a little bit and then just pick up your stroke again. Maybe I go down here and just keep drawing and then just having it go back and forth. Another detail that I like to add while drawing on these details is to have a wire that looks like it's been cut. So for this detail, you'll just continue the wire, maybe have it do one more loop, and then this one we're just going to go straight down and then we'll stop drawing. So it looks like here, this wire has been cut. So it ran from over here to over here, but at some point something broke this wire and now it's just hanging down. And now if we want to continue this to make it look like there was a cut here, but there's still wire on the other side, we're just going to pick a height, roughly about half the height of this one. So I'll start around here, draw a line straight up until it touches the wire, and then go back to what I was doing and just start doing these wiggles again. And just have it go across the line. So now if we zoom out, this line here is significantly more interesting and realistic than these single lines that we drew here. And it was really easy to do this. So if you haven't already, go ahead and finish this top line, just doing details something like this. A couple wiggles, areas where it droops down a little lower, maybe add a break in the line, something similar to this, until you reach the other side. Before we work on the lower line, I do want to let you know that I won't be walking you through every single bit of drawing for these wires, as it's largely the exact same technique over and over again. That doesn't mean that you're on your own for the rest of the lesson though. We'll still be going through all of the unique areas that wires might appear in, and I'll walk you through the first part of these areas. But the bulk of the drawing is going to be self-guided after I've given you all the tools that you need to be successful. For the large part, these wires are basically all the same. We're going to be doing very similar details all over the image to make wires that look like this, just in various different locations. So if there's something new I can teach you, I'll let you know, but in general, you're just going to be adding wires like this across the rest of the scene. The best part about grease pencil is that it's unique to the hand that drew it. Even if I showed you every single brush stroke that I made, your drawing would still be a little bit different than mine because you're the one who created it. There's no way that you could perfectly replicate exactly what I was doing either way. For those of you that would rather have a result that's identical to mine for learning purposes though, I will be showing you how to import my exact drawing into your scene at the end of this lesson. This is by no means necessary, and you should use your own drawing if you enjoy the process, but I want to make sure that it's an option for those that want it. With that out of the way, let's go down here to the lower line and add some detail here. So we're going to zoom in over here on the left side, and this time we can try some different techniques, such as loops or wires that jump from the lower line to the upper line. Let's start with a normal wiggly line like we did before. So we're just going to start over here in this corner, and then we'll just start drawing lines here that loop back and forth across the length of this line. Do your best not to have the exact same shape, however, directly above one another. So like I wouldn't want to have drawn this longer droop area directly below this one. I do want to vary their positions vertically. And now as an example of something new you can do, let's go over here further to the right. And then this time we're going to pick the line back up, start drawing it down here. And then we're going to have this line just go all the way up here to the top line and start snaking back and forth up here. And then once you're satisfied with the amount of distance it's covered, you can have it just drop right back down to this lower line. Now it looks like somebody wrapped this wire across both of these lines instead of just having it follow the one. You can do this method as many times as you want if you want your line to have a lot more crisscrossing wires. You'll notice over here, the way I drew this line, now it intersects with the end of this broken line. So if that happens to you, just feel free to extend this line down, make it a little bit longer, and then maybe make this one a little longer to compensate. Now let's finish the far right side of this line and finish this wire going over. This time we can add some loops to it instead. Instead of having droops, we can have a corkscrew go across. So let's just extend this line down here, and then we'll have it loop back up. And then this time, let's just have it do a full loop right back this way, and then loop back. Maybe do it one more time, and then just go up to the top. These loops are just another way that we can give this wire some character as it runs the length of the longer wire. Feel free to use any of these tricks on any wire in the scene to add some fun variety. I'm sure you can even think of other different techniques to add to your wires that are different than the ones I just showed you. As the final step for this grouping of wires, let's add another line here that covers this bottom segment. Because right now, after we jumped from the bottom to the top, there's this large bare patch. I'm not going to bother starting from the very end and going all the way across. I'm just going to find any intersection here, and I'll just pick it up. So I'm just going to add a new line here, and then just have it start corkscrewing back and forth. Maybe I'll add a little loop here, and then I can scroll over, and then just continue this line. Maybe have it droop down a little bit. You can see it really doesn't matter what you do here. It can be pretty loose and chaotic. We're just doing this to add a little bit more detail and fill in the scene. We really just want to bulk these wires out and make them look a little bit thicker so they take up more room in the scene. For now, we're going to move on to the next area of wires, but feel free to continue adding details to your wires after this lesson, or just pause the video right now and then finish doing this type of detailing down the entirety of the line here. But either way, we're going to be moving on to the next step. The next area of wires that we add are going to be on the opposite side of the column and will run towards the pipes and the walls. So we're going to have a wire that stretches from here and then runs this direction towards this wall over here, this slanted wall with the pipes. To do this, we need to decide which column we want to have these wires start on. Let's use the camera view on the left side to determine which of these columns is the best for this view. I think in this case, we're probably going to want to choose this column here as it's the first one that we can see the entirety of. So what we'll do is just zoom in here, and we can hold Shift and right click, and then click anywhere on the side of this column here and place it. When you moved your 3D cursor in the left view, you'll notice that it's disappeared here. We did move it, however we can't see it. And this is because we have the viewport overlays turned off on this left side. If you wanted to turn them back on, you could go over here on this top bar, pan it all the way over here to the right, and then click this button here that looks like two circles overlapping. We'll see if I turn this back on, now I can see where this popped up. So if I wanted to reposition it, I could reposition it and see where it's at. But then once I'm happy with it, I am going to turn this back off as it does clean this view up a bit more. The wires that we're about to draw are going to flow a different direction. We need to change the mode from side over here on the right side. We're going to switch it instead to front. This will change the plane that we're drawing on based on the placement of 3D cursor that we just moved. With these two settings changed, we're ready to begin drawing. We have two different ways that we could approach this drawing. We can draw directly from the camera view over here on the left side, or over here on the right, can rotate this view to get it back into a perspective view and then draw over here instead. Either method works, but they each have their own concerns. We'll start by drawing a line in the camera view first. So I'm just going to zoom in here, and then I'm going to draw a line from this intersection. Just click and drag a line, and then place it down here. So now we can see I've drawn a line, and while I wasn't expecting to have to teach you this right now, this is as good a time as any. So you'll see here that this line actually went into the column. It almost appears as if it's going through it. And that's because this line got confused as to which plane it was being drawn on. So if we zoom in here, you can see this line is actually going behind the column here. It's intersecting with it. So the easiest way to fix this is to simply hit Ctrl-Z to undo that line you just drew. And then we're just going to hold Shift, and you can do this in the left or the right view, it doesn't matter. Hold Shift and then right click just somewhere new on this column. We want to kind of force Blender to update its position of this 3D cursor. And then we're going to try to draw our line again, see if it has that problem. And we can see here, it no longer has that issue. It seems like it's going in front of the column now, which is what we want. So I can Ctrl-Z, and now I'm free to draw my line again. So if you have this issue at any point while you're drawing with this 3D cursor, simply hold Shift and just click somewhere near where the 3D cursor used to be and just have it update the position slightly, an inch to the left or an inch to the right, and then try to draw your line again, and it should hopefully fix it. So again, I'm going to draw from this intersection, I'll just draw down and I'll have this wire go until it touches this wall. Right about there, it stops drawing because it's going behind the wall. So you might have noticed already that because we drew this line from the camera view, everything over here looks correct. It looks like this line meets this intersection well enough, and it looks like they're all connected. However, if we look over here in this perspective view, you'll notice that that line I just drew is actually poking out slightly. And that's because this camera view isn't a great representation of how these lines are actually meeting. This is the concern that I mentioned before. The main downside of drawing directly from your camera view is you're not really drawing directly within the world. You're just drawing directly from a view of that world. So you have issues like this where this line looks like it's touching, but in reality it's not. So at this point, this is a situation where you need to decide if this small inconsistency matters to you or not. This small gap that we see here is not noticeable at all from the camera view. So as far as that view is concerned, there's nothing wrong. We would only notice this if we included a lot of camera movement or changed the angle of our camera drastically. If neither of these situations concern you, then there's really nothing to worry about. You can just carry on as normal and continue adding lines. However, if you'd rather make sure that these lines are at least close to touching or they have a believable intersection, we'll need to do a little bit more work. So if you would like to know how to fix this and make them a little bit closer to each other, we're going to Control Z, this line that we just drew. We're going to have to redraw it. And then over here in our right viewport, we're going to be drawing from here instead. So it's a little bit more awkward to draw from this view because we're kind of drawing at an angle and we're not really drawing right on a flat image. You'll find it's a little bit more difficult here, and also this cursor is kind of jumping around and it's changing its size. It will still draw the line where we want it, wherever this 3D cursor is, but visually things are a little bit more chaotic over here. So now in this right view, we're going to find a view that's a little bit more straight on. And we're going to do our best here to try to make sure that this line we start is around the same location as this line above. So I'm going to start drawing here at a view that's a little bit more consistent with the location. So I'll just click from here, and then I'll click and drag, draw my line down until it makes contact with the wall. And now we can go over here and zoom in and see how well we did. So in this case here, we can see it's roughly on the same plane, but they're still not connected. However, this is a much easier problem to fix. In this case, all we need to do is zoom in on these lines, get a better view, and then just draw a line going vertical until these eventually touch. So now these lines are actually physically connected to each other. Except let's see. Okay, so there is a small gap here. We are a little bit off. So this is another situation where I can show you something else. So if this same problem happens to you, we're going to instead switch to the side view like we were before. Then we're going to hold Shift and right click, place our 3D cursor here on the front side of this column. And now we're going to draw a line from here and try to intersect it with this. So we're just doing our best from different angles here to make sure that these lines somewhat attach to each other. So in this case, we've gotten a much closer. There is still a small gap here, but you would never notice that in most cases. So in general, these lines here are basically intersected, and we've avoided that issue that we had before of when we first drew this line only from the camera. You do notice, however, that this is significantly more fiddly and there's more to think about while you're drawing them. So if that seems like a lot of work and you don't want to have to worry about that, I would suggest that you just draw from the camera view, and then if anything's really bad, maybe go back and undo that line or erase the portion of it that's the problem and just try to do your best to redraw it. But if you plan on having a lot of different camera angles and you want to have a lot of camera movement in your animation, this is the process that you're probably going to end up going through to make sure that all these lines intersect. It's up to you to decide if it's worth the effort for your intentions. You can also take the approach of waiting until you're near the end of the project and you're basically finished drawing, and then you can see if these little mismatches are even worth fixing. You might have a mismatch of the lines here, but then when you move your camera around, you don't even notice it anyway, so it really wasn't worth the effort in fixing. Either way, both methods are valid. With that discussion out of the way, let's go back over here and switch it from side to front. And then we're going to hold Shift and right click, and then place our 3D cursor here on the right side of this column again. Now we can finish drawing some extra lines on the side of this column. I won't be narrating each movement here as it's essentially an identical process to the first drawing that we did, but feel free to follow along roughly with what I do. So let's finish adding some more lines here. Alright, so I finished adding some lines here that just go back and forth between this slanted wall and the column. Some of them go back and forth across the column, and then eventually they just terminate down here underneath this pipe where we can't really see them from the view. Before you add any extra details to these wires, like we did down here with the wiggly lines and broken lines, double check what size brush you were using when you drew these. So right now I know that I used a radius of 0.02, which means that I want to go a little bit smaller when drawing the details on these lines. In this case, I might go down to say 0.015 for these details, just so these lines are a little bit thinner. As I mentioned before, I'm not going to go through the entire detail process for these wires, as it's basically the exact same methods as we used before, drawing these details on the far left. But you would be using the same techniques, just going back and forth, drawing some squiggly lines, going back and forth over here, maybe adding a loop every once in a while, having them meet. And then you can also have parts where they just hang down as if they're broken, or have areas where they jump back and forth across the line. So maybe it jumps from here over to this one. You really just want to add some visual texture to help tell a better story. You can see with this really messy example that I just did here, it already looks kind of cool from this camera view, so you really can't go wrong with adding detail. Don't be afraid to try new techniques and make it unique to you and your style. You can also do this process of going back and forth between the column and the wall on a different column just by changing where this position of your 3D cursor is. If you wanted to do it again down here, hold Shift, right click, and place it down here. And now you can do this exact same process that we see on this column instead. In the next lesson, we'll finish creating the wires in our scene. I'll see you there.